So I will read my poem that's in this edition of the Mountain Troubadour, and it's called "To the Pine Tree Looming Over the Gion River." You will fall. No fighting it now. Inevitable. It will not be your fault, but that does not ease the splintering, the crack and crash, the water bone shiver cold. What will remain? What will grow in your place? A ghost of you, stump and roots, your corpse washed away by icy currents, your place on the bank forgotten. And who will bear witness? Who will remember?
Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 451. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and highly talented Vermont author and poet, Erika Nichols-Frazer.
Hi, nice to be here.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Great. Are you enjoying this lovely July day where it's not actually in the 90s?
I am. Yeah, it's nice and tolerable and cool. It's great.
I know. See, and we were mentioning. So for our listeners out there, I could tell before we started recording. I mentioned to Erika that she's probably on the second floor because of the slant of the roof behind her. I know she's on the second floor, or she's in some underground bunker. But I was guessing because of the natural light that you're on the second floor. And
I am, in fact.
It's cool. Yes, and it's cool enough where you're not having like an air conditioner running or something like that because yes, hot air rises. So yeah, and you are so it's interesting. So you're here also to talk about some of your work, but you're also here to talk about the Poetry Society of Vermont.
That's right. So the Poetry Society of Vermont was established in 1947, and the Mountain Troubadour, which is our print annual literary magazine of poetry, has been in publication since 1956. This is volume 71 that's just dropping right now. We actually have a book launch coming up on the 12th of July, so that may be after this this podcast airs. But we do have a book launch happening in Montpelier to celebrate the 49 poets whose work is in this edition.
Okay. Now, talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned that the Poetry Society of Vermont came out, it was founded in 1947. So in 2 more years, you're going to be celebrating your 80th anniversary.
Yep, that's right. We had our 75th issue a few years ago, and 80 is coming up.
Okay. And so what makes the Mountain Troubadour kind of special and unique to Vermont's literary scene?
Well, all of the work published in the Mountain Troubadour is by members of the Poetry Society of Vermont. So that's people either from Vermont or with connections to Vermont who've wanted to stay connected to the Vermont literary and poetry scene. So these are Vermonters or former Vermonters, people whose heart is in Vermont, showcasing their work. Several of them have told us that they had never been published before, that this is their first publication, which is really exciting. So, for some poets, they've never had that opportunity to share their work with others. And so it's a really wide range of work from themes, from ages. A unique thing about this issue is that the poets range in age from 16 to 96, which I think is pretty cool, that we're spanning generations of Vermont poets. And it includes work by Anne Day, who has been published over 60 times in the Troubadour. She has been a member since the 1950s, according to her. So she, is sort of our poet emeritus. And so we're really excited to showcase this breadth of work. And that 16-year-old I mentioned, Harmony Bell DeVoe, she was actually the inaugural Vermont Youth Poet Laureate and served as our intern this year. So we were really pleased to have her working with us on this issue.
And so how did the collaboration with Rootstock Publishing come about?
Well, Rootstock is a great local publisher based in Montpelier that has worked with a lot of Vermont authors. There's something that myself and others within the Poetry Society have been aware of, have been connected to. I personally know the publisher, Sam Kolber, who is also a poet and very connected in the Vermont poetry world. So we really liked the idea of working with a Vermont publisher. This was the first year that we worked with Rootstock, and we're really excited about the work they did, and it was a pleasure to work with them.
Mm. And so what was the process like for selecting poems for the journal? Because as we mentioned, you were the editor of the Mountain Troubadour.
Right, and we do have an editorial board who votes and reads all of the poems. They read submissions blind; they don't know who has submitted, and they rate the poems. And then the editor takes those poems and makes final decisions on the poems that go in.
Mm. And as the editor, what would you say is the most rewarding and most challenging part of curating the journal?
Sure. The most challenging is selecting the poems, right? There's so many great poems, and often you have to say no to good poems because you have something similar, or maybe that poet has other poems in the journal already. There are several ways that members can get poems accepted into the Troubadour, and I will talk about that. But that's always a challenge, right? Selecting the poems from such a wonderful selection of, I think we received something like 200 poems this year, right? So there's quite a few to cull through. And the most rewarding part, honestly, is hearing from the poets and communicating with them, hearing that they're excited to have their work shared, hearing their stories and getting to know them through their work and as people as well.
And so you were the editor. You became part of it back in 2023. So you're knocking on 3 years now coming up that you've been been part of the PSOV. Now, have you seen in your writing career so far an uptick of poetry since COVID?
I think so, personally. I've also worked in a hybrid publisher before during COVID. I worked at New Degree Press, and we were seeing more and more poets come through at that time. So I do think it's something that is maybe having a resurgence in popularity. It's been really great to see so many members of the Poetry Society, from really well published, experienced poets to newer poets of all ages, right? So I do think that there has been an uptick or a swing back towards poetry, in recent years.
As the editor of the Poetry Society of Vermont, you see poetry, you work with poetry a lot. How do you keep the creative momentum to actually then, in your spare time, use more creative energy in your spare time to still do poetry?
Yeah, I find inspiration from our poets, from reading our poets and talking to our poets, and other folks, other writers and people in the literary sphere. In Vermont, as you know, we have such a rich literary community here. And I get energized talking to other writers and readers, about literature. And often I get ideas to, go home and jot down, whether it's a poem or part of a story. I write across all genres, but poetry has a special place in my heart. And I sort of think of myself as a poet first, and prose writer second, even though I got my master's degree in fiction. But so I write a little bit of everything, but I do have a deep love for poetry, and I often find that hearing someone else's poem or reading something, or it sparks an idea for me, and inspires me to write.
And so you brought, because you're using different mental gymnastics when it comes to writing poetry than it is writing long prose.
Right.
Now, do you see it easier for a long prose writer to write poetry, or it's easier for a poet to write long prose?
That's a good question. I mean, none of it's really easy, right? It's all hard work.
Easy, yeah, yeah.
Um, for me, I think that my poetry writing serves my prose writing well, and I do think vice versa, right? So I think that I gain skills in both of those things. And often I start something out as a poem and it becomes a short story. Sometimes it has gone the other way. And if you look at, I have two published books currently, a memoir as well as a poetry collection. And if you read the memoir and then you read the poetry collection, you'll recognize some of the themes and some of the stories that have inspired those poems. And I think it actually, helps you understand them a little more, right? And so I may be writing about similar things in different styles, different genres, right? So I think that any writing you do can serve other writing as well, right? And so it is just a different, sort of a different lens to look through.
And so with the Mountain Troubadour, how do you balance elevating new voices with featured seasoned poets too?
That's something that has always been really important to me, trying to give space to as many voices as possible. One of the things, so I will first just explain how the Poetry Society selects poems, because there's a couple different ways that it happens. So we do have our general submissions period, when Poetry Society of Vermont members are invited to submit up to 3 unpublished poems. We also do reprints of published poems, so they can submit 1 published poem if they'd like. We, of course, credit the original publisher or publication that published it. And so that's one way, and that's what our editorial board reads, and I read, and we make decisions on. We also have ways in which our members select poems. So we have fall and spring workshops every year. Members are invited to submit poems to be workshopped. We have well-known Vermont poets facilitate those workshops and workshop the work, the poems. And members vote on their top 10 favorite poems from each of those workshops, and they end up in the next year's Troubadour. And so one thing that we did in the last few years, it previously was the top 5 poems. We expanded it to 10 to give the membership more say in the poems that went in. So that means members are selecting 20 of the poems that go into the Troubadour. And there are 75 poems in this issue. So they have a pretty good say in what goes in. And part of the thinking behind that was to give more space to different voices, right? So it's not just the same people that a select group, tends to favor or tends to, be drawn to their work, that everyone can have a say. And the idea was that it would expand and give more people space and voices in the journal.
And so what do you look for in a poem when reading submissions?
That's something that we've talked about quite a bit. And I have really shied away from having a set criteria that we look for, because I think everybody looks for something a little different. And that's what I value, right? I don't like to have sort of a checklist, right? Because I think that everybody's drawn to something different when they read a poem. What I really look for is kind of that moment where you just get excited about a poem, where it speaks to you. So for me personally, I really love lyrical and creative, inventive language that really sticks with me, rhythmic language. I love original imagery, right? Something unexpected that I didn't particularly, have never seen before in that way. I love poetry that really says something to me, that gives me a strong message, right? That I can walk away from and really feel something. So for me, it's less of a strict list of things, checking boxes, and more of something that makes me really feel and think and reflect in a way that I hadn't thought of before.
Okay. And then I guess my next question for you then is, like, how does the editorial board then work together on the final selections?
Yep. So each of the editorial board members, and we had 6 members this year, as well as myself and then our intern, Harmony Bell DeVoe from Warren. They each rated the poems 1 to 10. And so then we aggregate those and look at the top poems. And so really a unique thing that the Poetry Society does is that we provide comments from the editorial board on every poem submitted if the poet wants that feedback. So this is the first year we've actually had a checkbox on the form when they submit, would you like to receive feedback? Typically, we've always given feedback, and most folks did want it. A few folks said, no, I'm good. But for the most part, we're providing multiple comments on every single poem. So that's something a little different from most literary magazines, that we're also helping our members grow as poets and hopefully hone their messaging and have even more effective poems.
What were there any surprise submissions this year that caught you off guard?
Thinking about that. There were a few submissions in particular that just kind of made me go, wow, I didn't expect that, or I that is just so original or different, or I love that language, or I really love how that looks on a page. I love experimentation in poetry, so I love to see something a little new and different. And there were some poems that definitely fit under that category. It's a real mix of more traditional and poems that follow a particular poetic form, as well as more experimental and more avant-garde poetry.
And so with the Poetry Society of Vermont, we've talked a little bit about the poetry piece. We've talked a little bit about the society piece. So, how does Vermont's landscape, do you feel, influence the poetry that comes through the journal?
That's a great question, because I think that it absolutely features Vermont's landscape, Vermont's our nature, our people, our ways of living are very much present and alive in the journal. Many poems in the journal focus on the natural world of Vermont, the seasons, right? Observations of whether it's flora or fauna, things we see in Vermont, things that are familiar to us. The opening poem this year has to do with flooding, right? And so that's something that we've seen. Those of us who live in Vermont have seen devastating flooding over the last several years, right? So it's something that many Vermonters will recognize and empathize with and connect with. So Vermont's landscape and its people are all over the pages of this journal.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. What do you hope readers can take away from this year's edition?
I hope more than anything that readers can find hope and connection in these poems, can feel connected to other poets or the world, whether it's nature or anything that they find in that poem that speaks to them. I think connection is something we're missing a lot of these days. And I think that, finding that sense of hope, that sense of, looking forward to a better future, I think is in a lot of these poems.
Is there a poem that you want to read to us right now?
So I will read my poem that's in this this edition of the Mountain Troubadour, and it's called "To the Pine Tree Looming Over the Gion River." You will fall. No fighting it now. Inevitable. It will not be your fault, but that does not ease the splintering, the crack and crash, the water bone shiver cold. What will remain? What will grow in your place? A ghost of you, stump and roots, your corpse washed away by icy currents, your place on the bank forgotten. And who will bear witness? Who will remember?
What advice would you give poets hoping to submit to future issues?
I think I would give the same advice to anyone who's interested in submitting anywhere to any literary journal, right? That you would to submit to the Troubadour as well, which is polish your work, read it out loud, right? Read it to an audience, to a trusted friend or writer, preferably someone who likes to read, if it's poetry, who likes to read poetry, right? Get some feedback on it before you send it in. Send in your best work that you feel proud of. Right. And it's always a good idea to take a look at previous issues of a journal. So one thing that we started doing is publishing our short list, the poems that we really liked that didn't quite make it in the issue for one reason or another. We publish that online now. So you can go on the website and see poems, that ranked quite high. And so you can get a sense, as well as reading past issues of the kind of things that the editorial board and the Poetry Society look for. And that's always a good idea when you're submitting to a literary magazine or publication, to familiarize yourself with the kind of work it publishes. So yeah, send your best, send work that you're proud of, send work that you think fits and aligns with the journal, and don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Right? It's as I said, we provide constructive feedback to anyone who wants it. And it is a supportive community. And so I think it's a good place to start if you're interested in submitting poetry.
Okay. And if people want to learn more or look to join the Poetry Society of Vermont, where's the best place they could go to?
They can go to poetrysocietyofvermont.org. It's all spelled out, full words, poetrysocietyofvermont.org. And you can see on the website where you can, under membership, can become a member. So we have a tiered membership. So you can select the level that feels most comfortable for you. Memberships are for a year. And so in that year, you receive a copy of the Mountain Troubadour. You are able to submit to the next issue if you would like. you are able to attend the various workshops that occur throughout the year. And there's special events. As I mentioned, we have a book launch coming up. We will have a fall workshop. And so you can be involved in a poetry community that exists statewide and beyond.
Okay. And Erika, if people want to learn more about you and your work, where is the best place they could go to?
Sure. They can find me on my website, which is nicholsfrazer.com. That's NICHOLSFRAZER.com. You can see a selection of my published work up there, as well as links to my books. And I do have a forthcoming book coming out next spring with Finishing Line Press. It is a poetry chapbook called Can You See Her, the Moon?
Perfect. Well, excellent. Erika, this has been a genuine pleasure. I'm so excited to learn more about the Poetry Society of Vermont. And it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Barney. You as well.
And talk to us a little bit about you as a poet and you as an author. You work doing this as as working in the PSOV. And do you see how and this is what I love about pre-recording, Erika. I used to do this live, and then what happens was I'd always mess up on the lines and all the questions. And then what would happen is that I would edit it later, and no one would really watch the edited version of the interview because people already watched it live, and they would see me mess up and they wouldn't do anything. So what I usually do now is like timestamp it, and then I just clean it up later. So it'd be so smooth. People are like, wow, look at Barney's asking all the great questions. He's just right on top of it. It's the power of editing, Erika. I tell you.
I'll probably mess up at some point too. So
yeah, I'll cut that out too if you want. So